keep up to date with everything at Knights at the Game Table, all you have to do is click subscribe and then hit that tiny little notification button next to it, so every time we upload a new video, YouTube will be sure to let you know.
Hey, this is Aryeh, and today I'm going to be building a Golgari sealed deck out of the Guilds of Ravnica pre-release pack. I'm going to start sorting by color, and let's get started. So after I've sorted all my monocolored cards, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to look at my gold cards and sort them by guild. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to evaluate my Golgari gold cards. We have some really good ones with Assassin's Trophy, Glowspire Shaman, and then even a couple rares with like Underrealm Lich and also Find Finality. So those are cards I'm definitely going to play no matter what. After that, I'm going to look at some of these other gold cards, see if, for now I'll probably keep them in my pile as I start to build around it with the single colored cards. In the end, it's possible they may get cut, but just at the beginning, when you're building in guilds, it's really good to lay out all the gold cards in your guild and kind of start from there. The next thing I would do is look at allied guilds. So Golgari is black-green. I would look at some Selesnya cards and also some Dimir cards. The reason for that is those are going to be the easiest cards to splash into our Golgari deck if we choose to, because they're going to share at least one color. In evaluating those, there's a few that I think are really good. House Guildmage is a card I wouldn't mind playing in a Golgari deck. And then there's some good Selesnya options here as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now evaluate my monocolored cards and try to figure out whether I want to be a straight Golgari deck or if I want to play a third color. The next thing you want to do is in Guilds of Ravnica, you're always going to be in a two-color guild, most of the time in sealed. So in this particular case, we have a Golgari box, so we want to look at our powerful Golgari cards, such as Undercity Uprising, Swarm Guildmage, and Glowspire Shaman. So we have, just looking initially at it, we already have 6 gold cards in our chosen guild that I think are very strong. When we're looking at this type of deck building, the most important thing is figuring out which cards in your monocolored cards fit best with your gold cards. So in this pool, a good example is Find Finality. Find Finality says that you can put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature, and then all creatures will get -4/-4 until end of turn. So it's basically what we call like a Wrath effect in Magic. It pretty much destroys all creatures, if not most of them, if not all. So when you're looking at a card like that, one of your most powerful rares is -4/-4. It makes you think about which cards can I play that would survive that card. So for example, a card like Dowser of Lights, which is a 5-mana 4/5, usually not one of the strongest cards, but it works very well in our deck because it's going to survive through Find Finality, and I won't have to target it to put 2 counters on it for it to survive the -4/-4 card. A similar thing happens with Rampaging Monument. I think this card is actually a pretty good card, and I would likely play it in most decks anyway. It's a colorless artifact, costs 4 mana. It comes in as a 3/3, and then for each gold card you play, it gets a +1/+1 counter. I think that card is also a very good card with Find Finality because Find Finality counts as a gold card. So if this creature were already a 4/4, Find Finality would place a counter on it when it's cast, and it would also survive through that card. So what we're kind of doing here is we're looking at our most powerful rares and then figuring out which commons and uncommons play well with those rares. So that way we have really good synergy in our deck. So after we do that, we see our gold cards, we pulled out some commons and uncommons that work well with the gold cards we have. We start to look at kind of what are our other like powerful cards, rares, cards that are going to allow us to win the game very easily in the late game. Because really in a set like this, with so many gold cards and so many guild gates and like pretty much most of your opponents are going to be playing a very powerful 3-color deck, you really want to see what your late game is. In this particular pool, we have pretty good late game. We have Hatchberry Spider, which is another rare. That's a very, very strong card. It's a 5/7 that can also place a card into play from your graveyard, which is pretty cool. Then you have Siegeworm, just an old card, but still good, 7 mana, 5/5 Convoke. And then we also have kind of a cool one too, a new one, which is Bounty of Might, which is like 3 giant growths together. It's +3/+3 to either 3 different things, or you can give one creature +9/+9. That is a very strong card at closing out a game. It does help if you give it to a trample creature like Siege Worm, but even if you could just put it on a small creature, maybe you attack with everything and there's one unblocked creature, you get +9/+9. This is a pretty good way to end the game. So we do have some of these powerful late game cards. We have some strong gold cards in our guild. We have some synergistic cards that look like they work well with our rares, which is a good thing. And then after we kind of have those most important elements of our deck, we're going to look how we can fill out our curve with some other 2 and 3 mana cards just to make sure that we have a card we can play each turn of the game. Now that we kind of have we have our high end, our expensive cards, we know kind of how we're going to win the game. Hatchery Spider, Siege Worm, Bounty of Might is probably how we're going to win most of the time. We see our removal suite is very strong with like Find Finality, Assassin's Trophy, and Deadly Visit. We have a lot of ways to remove opponents' creatures, which is a great thing in Sealed. We want to see how we can fill out those last few spots in our deck. I've chosen to do that by choosing a few cards that aren't that strong on their own, but I think kind of lend a lot to this strategy. I'm actually going to play Generous Stray, which is not necessarily a card I would always play. It's a 3 mana 1/2, which is not great, but since I have multiple Undergrowth cards and it's important for me to get creatures into my graveyard, and Generous Stray also allows me to draw a card, which I think in my deck being a slower late game deck with a lot of removal, I think drawing a card is really important. The ability to kind of have both of those in one card, I think makes that card a good inclusion, especially given that I have so much high end, I have a good number of 2-drops, but I don't have all that much in the middle. I think Generous Stray and Okran Assassin are going to be the 2 best sort of mid-range, turn 3 cards I can play. This one draws a card, and Okran Assassin has Death Touch, so that allows me to kind of bridge from my 2-drops to my late game by either kind of drawing through my deck or trading with a creature with Okran Assassin having Death Touch. One thing you want to always do in Sealed is try to see how many creatures you have and also how many 2-drops you have. In pretty much most Sealed formats, you're going to want between 3 and 4 2-mana creatures. In a very aggressive format, occasionally it's more, but almost all the time you're looking to have between 3 and 4 2-drops. In this case, I do have 3 on-color 2-drops. I am playing a House Guildmage, which is unlikely to get played on turn 2, but it is possible if I draw my Dimir Guildgate early that it might be, so I'm going to leave it in that pile. So that's good. The number of 2-drops we have here is excellent. Then I also want to look at the very high end of my curve and see if I have strong win condition ways to win the game in the late game, which in this case I really do with, I have a Vigor Spire Worm, a Hatchery Spider, and a Siege Worm, along with Bounty of Might. All of those 6 mana cards are very, very good at closing out the game. They're really big creatures that most other decks are going to have trouble dealing with. So then the biggest question after I have my 2-drop set and my high-end set is what am I going to do here in the middle? There are a few different options with this pool. I could be playing, for example, like a few other cards like a Crawl Forgers, which is a 5 mana 4/4. Not the most exciting card, but it could be possible to play here. But instead what I'm choosing to do is to kind of maximize the impact of my late game cards by playing Circuitous Route, which is a 4 mana sorcery that allows me to take 2 lands, including either basics or gates, and put them into play. What that allows me to do is ramp from 4 mana on turn 4 immediately into like my Siege Worms, my Hatchery Spiders, and my Find Finalities. With this particular pool, I have so many expensive cards that I think I would play Circuitous Route no matter what. But since I have it in my deck, it makes playing the Dimir House Guildmage a lot easier, because if I draw the Circuitous Route, I can find Dimir Guildgate, and I'm already all the way there. Now that we have kind of the high-end set, we have the mana fixing set up, and we know what our 2-drops are, we're going to look at sort of our, what we call like, I guess, like a meat and potatoes part of your deck. What are you going to do turns 4, 5, 3, 4, and 5 in those mid-game turns? In this case, I have some pretty strong creatures. I have 2 creatures that are going to give me value on 3. I have 2 4-mana creatures that I think are going to be very strong with Undercity Necrolisk, which allows me to like sacrifice another creature. Since I have some 2-drops that are probably unimpressive in the late game, and Generous Stray as I'm playing just as a way to draw a card, those are easy for me to sacrifice to the Necrolisk to make it larger. And Rampaging Monument, which you talked about earlier, is a card that's going to get larger with each gold card I play. And as you can see in this deck, I have a lot of gold cards. Once we kind of know what our early game looks like, what our late game looks like, and we're kind of able to fill in the middle with some creatures, most Sealed decks you're looking at having somewhere between 13 and 17 creatures. Now, the more aggressive decks are going to tend to have more creatures because they're going to want to get a lot of cards in play quickly. For example, Boros is a red-white deck. I would probably want between 16 and 18 creatures in most of my Boros decks. Since this is a Golgari deck and it's a little more controlling, it's got removal spells like Assassin's Trophy and Deadly Visit and Find Finality, this particular deck is going to play a few less creatures and is going to play a little more removal. As far as our process for sealed, the first thing we did was pull out the strongest cards in our guild. Then we figured out which commons and uncommons worked well with those cards. We laid out our whole curve, made sure we had 2-drops and late game, and then tried to see what worked best to put in the middle to help those two extreme parts of the curve out. And then we decided how many creatures versus non-creatures we're going to play. In this case, we're actually going to play quite a few non-creatures because our deck's a little bit more of a control deck because we have a Wrath effect that's -4 to all creatures, as well as several spot removal spells to make sure our opponent can't land any really strong threats. So after you've kind of built your curve, you've found which non-creature spells you want to play, the next thing to do is we need to look at your mana base. For Ravnica in particular, I think a lot of the time your goal in a 2-color deck should be to have 9/9. Like for Golgari, it would be 9 black sources and 9 green sources. So in this case, like a Golgari Guildgate is going to count for both. So that's one card that actually counts twice. So 9/9 is a good way to go because a lot of your 2-drops, the 2-mana cards in Guilds of Ravnica are going to cost 1 green and 1 black. So having, for example, like 2 forests on your second turn is not always going to be that great because it's going to prevent you from playing your gold cards. So ideally you have in a 2-color deck 9/9. Now for a 3-color deck it's a little more challenging. It's going to depend on how many guild gates and other forms of fixing like lockets you open. But a good rule of thumb, if you're going to be splashing a 3rd color for like a powerful mythic or a planeswalker, one way to think about it is you want to get about 4 sources of that 3rd color. Now if you can get those sources from guild gates and lockets and not have to play any basic lands of your 3rd color, that's really, really good. But no matter how you kind of figure it out, the minimum to have for a splashed card is going to be 4. You don't really want to go under that. So if you can get 4 sources and still keep your main 2 colors to right around 8 sources each, that's going to be perfect. So to me, your 2 best kind of mana bases in this format, 2-color deck, 9/9, 3-color deck, 8/8/4. If you can do that, I think you're going to have a deck that's going to be really successful at casting its spells on time. The best way to use your time is to spend about the first 10 minutes establishing which are your best cards. I'd be pulling those cards out, placing them in the middle of my playmat here, and saying, okay, that's the direction I want to go. I want to build around these strong cards. After you've evaluated that, you want to sort your cards by color and then look to see where your strengths are. Even if your best card, for example, was Golgari, but you didn't have much support, you might have to now look at maybe I should play an Izzet Seal deck, maybe I should play a Dimir Seal deck. I can't play Golgari, I don't have enough support for my gold cards. And then after about 15 to 20 minutes have elapsed, we start actually building our deck. And that's where we start laying out our curve just the way I did here. And we start with our lowest mana costs 2, and we move all the way to our late game cards, which cost 6 or 7. It's really important to have a visual look at how your cards actually lay out, because if you don't build it this way, sometimes you think you have enough cards for each mana cost, but you actually don't. So it's really important to visually make sure that your curve is strong from beginning to end. By this time, about 20 or 30 minutes has likely elapsed. At that time, you want to start building your mana base, counting your sources and making sure that your deck can cast its cards successfully pretty often. After you finish building your mana base, that's when you're going to start sleeving up your deck, and then you get to go and see how many Siege Worms you can cast and how many opponents you can get down to 0.